Hello and welcome to the Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University's International Women's Day 2021 celebration. Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University is also known as CABGU. My name is Galit Solomon. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications with CABGU, and I'm pleased to bring greetings today and welcome you all on behalf of our organization. I'm confident that once again we have chosen wisely. Our fantastic program today will feature some fascinating women. The theme for this year's International Women's Day campaign is Choose to Challenge. The idea is that we are all responsible for our own thoughts and actions, and as such, we can identify and call out gender bias and inequality. Collectively, we can all help create an inclusive world, and I sincerely hope that you will join us today and every day in choosing to challenge. Before turning things over to our moderator, I would like to extend my gratitude to our CEO, Mark Mendelson, who chose to challenge this year by offering the screen at today's event to an all-female panel of moderators and presenters, and removed himself from his regular duties as our webinar moderator. A friendly reminder to please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions, and kindly let us know your name as well as where you're from. And now I am thrilled to introduce today's moderator. Natalie Stern is a dedicated supporter of CABGU. She is the founder and former artistic director of the Ottawa School of Speech and Drama and the owner and director of Power Speech. Ms. Stern, the screen is yours.
Hello, Galit. And I would like to reinforce, I don't think I have my video. I would like to reinforce what you said and say thank you to everyone at BGU Canada to see that we had our voice today, and we know that all of the men in your team are celebrating with us. For many, many years, we had a International Women's Day celebration in my home in the garden, and I always missed out on having our family and friends from all overseas. So today I'd like to welcome my sister-in-law Sharon Stern from London, my daughter-in-law Mayra Stern from Boston, and my niece Deborah Stern from Philadelphia. So watch out, ladies, you've got 4 Sterns in this meeting. I've known Julie for over 20 years. I met with her students and have been astounded to witness the growth of her department and the wide-ranging aspects of her research and programming. Julie, it's a pleasure to see you again as a friend and as a supporter of your wonderful work. Professor Julie Cwikel is a full professor at the Chilowich Family Chair in Studies on Social Integration. She is the founder and director of Israel's only Center for Research on Women's Health, the Ben-Gurion University Center for Women's Health Studies and Promotion. She is a social epidemiologist, author of the only single author textbook on this topic, edited Social Epidemiology, Strategies for Public Health and Activism, published by Columbia University in 2006. Furthermore, Julie is a clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and the founder of the Mom to Mom Negev, support for new mothers transitioning to parenthood, and Isha B. Shala, a gender culturally sensitive counseling service. She's a long-standing member of the Advisory Council on Women's Health that advises Israel's Minister of Health, a founding member of the cross-disciplinary committee of the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders that has introduced legislation to support new mothers grappling with mental health challenges, and has recently been invited to join the European Institute on Women's Health and the Israeli National Coalition to Combat Domestic Violence. She was born in Seattle, Washington, grew up in Berkeley, California, and made Aliyah twice, once in 1973 and again in 1986. The mother of 7, 4 biologicals and 3 stepdaughters, and grandmother of 13. She's also the author of more than 130 scientific papers and the editor of 3 collections of new research on women's health. Well, they say if you want to get something done, ask a busy person, and that's you, Julie, and we're all welcoming you. Over to you, Julie.
Unmuted. Start my video. Let's see. Can handle all of the technological side of things. We're trying. There we go. Thank you, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. Oh, for us, it's tonight. It's for your noontime in Canada. And indeed, there's much to say about the 22 years that we've been running the center and using the support of our Canadian friends to get things done. So what am I going to say? First of all, we're all celebrating International Women's Day together. And this is an event that probably in many people's minds, when they think of unusual women or famous women from Israel, probably the first name that pops into their mind is Golda Meir, maybe Ada Donat, our Nobel Prize winner. And I'm sure that some of the younger people will be thinking of Gal Gadot and other of the famous Israeli women, and there are many. But for me, if I look for a role model about who got me started on my Center for Women's Health Studies and Promotion, I look to Henrietta Zold, who was born in Baltimore and became the founder of Hadassah Hospital, and she started social work and nursing training programs. She's considered the mother of many because she organized the Youth Aliyah, which is still going, to rescue all orphans from the Holocaust. And she, in general, promoted health together with education and women's rights. Some of you may not know this, but I learned it last week, that in fact, Mother's Day in Israel is celebrated on her yahrzeit because although she didn't have children of her own, she's considered the mother of many. But there's another person who inspired me, and that's Canada's own Frida Paltiel, who I had the honor of getting to know and getting her advice when I started the center. She was the advisor to the Canadian government on women's health and a shining light for those of us who were trying to learn how to make an impact in issues of women's health. So I consider her my personal mentor. So today I'm going to quickly talk about a background on women's health. I'm going to explain a little bit why our approach in our center is unique and how the social epidemiology fits in with that approach. I'm going to briefly talk about some of our accomplishments in the center. I'm going to give an example of our study that we did that used biogas as the center driving innovation that we worked on. I'm going to talk very briefly about Mom to Mom and Isha B'Shelah. I'm going to give a quick overview of our center in numbers, and then I'm going to be speaking a little bit about our newest project, which we call Covana. So let's jump right in. So what is women's health? Women's health is the preservation of wellness and the prevention of diseases that are unique to women, more common among women, more serious among women, or have unique manifestations, risk factors, or that need special types of interventions. Of course, when we look at research, we look both at biology, which is the sex that we are born with, and gender. And as you probably know, gender is the psychosocial interpretation of what the biological sex signifies. And we know that girls have a huge role to play in as a force for change. In fact, it's now known as the girl effect, that makes things happen in a different way. When we look at how gender and biology interact, we can see another example about life expectancy. Here are 3 well-developed democracies, Israel, the United States, and Japan. And we see that in general, the life expectancy of women is longer than that of men, usually between 6 and 7 years. And in Japan, for example, it's 6 years. In the United States, it's 5 years. And in Israel, it's only 3 years. So this made us ask questions about what is going on in Israel that's good for men's health on the one hand. For example, you see that the life expectancy of men in Israel and Japan is about the same, but it's not so good for women's health. So that was one of the things that we were pondering when we started this center. And some people would quip and say that what's good for men's health is that they're married to Jewish mothers. But maybe there are other reasons too. For example, alcohol use or army service. The other thing that we know that's universal and affects women's health is gender inequality. Women have less access to resources than men all over the world. And this difference in allocation, of course, affects how health and healthcare resources are used. And what we've learned is that when we improve women's health, they go on to improve the health of their children and their families, because basically they are the family's healthcare provider. But one of the things we've noticed is that when women and men are working in the same place, women go back and continue with a second shift and are basically mostly responsible, particularly in young families that have 2 working parents and have children at home. Women are doing a much larger number of hours of work at home to take care of children and home requirements. But this doesn't just happen at the home, it also happens in the workplace. So for example, in Israel, we see that women, even when they're working at the same jobs as men, are earning 66% of the salary of men. And in the United States and Canada, it's around 85%. And when they are at work, women often tend to take on responsibilities that are administrative and don't lead to extra earnings or to promotions. So this is a problem. And by the way, one of the things we've seen with COVID-19 is that in Israel, women are the first ones who are being sent home on leave when the economy got worse because of COVID. 70% of those who were sent home are in fact women. When we look at some of the things that have happened in women's health in the last 30 years, we can see that there are problems that started decades ago that are still going on today. So for example, 8 out of the 10 drugs that were withdrawn by the American Food and Drug Administration were withdrawn because of adverse side effects among women. And among those side effects, those six out of those 8 drugs that were withdrawn had to do with excessive health risk for cardiac function. Now, one may ask, why does this happen? And the answer is that the 2 major trials, clinical trials on treatment for cardiovascular problems included 35,000 men and 0 women. So we had a problem that we were not testing drugs and interventions on women. So the FDA insisted that women be, up until 1993, they were excluded from clinical trials. And at that time, the regulations changed to include women in clinical trials. But still, even today, there's a new drug called the polypill that's being tested for cardiovascular diseases. And among those who joined the clinical trial, only 25% of them were women, although both men and women, for them, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of men and women in all of the developed countries. Another thing that's gotten people kind of worried about their research is that recently the NIH declared that all laboratory cells that are being used in laboratory research basically have a sex, whereas we all thought that, you know, once you have a cell line in a laboratory, it's a cell line. But no, what we found is that the sex of the donor of the cell line, whether it's a mammal or it's a human, in fact, affect the way that those cells will operate in basic research. So coming now to Israel and our BGU, I want to tell you some unique facts about BGU. First of all, probably some of you know that we were graced with having the first female university president, Professor Rivka Kalmi, a colleague of mine, and who helped, by the way, start the center and was our supporter. And she was a first in that sense. And now that we have Professor Daniel Chamovitz as our president, he's continuing the tradition of promoting women at BGU, and he supports the policy of having 50-50 representation of men and women from the faculties on key committees for promotion. So we have to give him kudos for that. We have about 1,200 Arab students at BGU, 450 of whom are Bedouin students. And of those Bedouin students who come from the Negev, 70% of them are women. We're very proud of the fact that one of our recent staff members who joined us at the center is Dr. Samira Al-Fayumi Zayedna, who is a nurse and a clinical researcher. And she has joined us in order to develop the program of Mom to Mom and support for new mothers, specifically for women in the Bedouin community. And we're very pleased to have her. When I was a doctoral student at the University of Michigan, it was the heyday of the AIDS epidemic. And everybody was talking about the fact that since there was no cure at that time and no treatment, what we really had to do was change behavior. So all of a sudden, they were all talking about the need for social epidemiology as an answer for the AIDS epidemic. And since I had already 2 degrees in social work, I said, okay, great. That must be what I will be when I grow up, because I want to be a social epidemiologist. So I said, where's the book? They said, there is no book. And so I said, okay, I'll try to write that book. I wrote the first comprehensive textbook of social epidemiology. It was published in 2006, and it took me 12 years to write it. But this has been the guiding light for how we organize the research and the work in our center. Because the basic premise in social epidemiology is create new research and then apply it to real life problems and issues. And that's what we've done in our center. One of the things we learned from social epidemiology is to look for areas where we have a natural human laboratory. And in the Negev, we have a huge diversity of women who are part of our programs and for whom we try to develop culturally sensitive answers to that address problems of women's health. So as you see, we have women from Ethiopia, women from Russia, women who are Israeli-born, women who are Arab-speaking Israeli-born women, women from Canada, from the United States, from Europe, and so on. We also have a multidisciplinary center. Our center belongs, in fact, to 2 faculties, the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, and the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And we, in fact, believe in going from the cell to the clinic to the community for research on prevention and intervention, using all different kinds of disciplines. When we look at women's health, we often think of the old model being the bikini model, where the strategic areas of the bikini are what we look at. But today we talk about a new model, which is a personalized health model, where we look the person in the eye and we expect them to take a part in making decisions about their health. We have done a lot in terms of developing new programs in education, both in the medical school and in the Faculty of Social Sciences. We have developed new treatment methods, for example, combining between art therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. We have done new research on women's health, for example, looking at why the drug that was developed as the answer for Viagra was not able to be marketed well. We've looked at how women fare when they've been trafficked for sex work. I did a long-term program on the health effects of the Chernobyl accident, looking recently at the long-term effects on reproductive health. And we've done a lot of work on helping women overcome infertility. Among our community projects, I mentioned already, Mom to Mom, which is a program where we have professionals in the area of social work and family treatment who recruit volunteers who help a mother during the first critical year of her infant's life. And so we have volunteers and we have professionals. We also have a gender and culturally sensitive psychotherapy program. And we have, in the last 2 years, been graced with a gift that allowed us to give a special program in psychotherapy for women with complex trauma, which are women who need long-term therapy and require special skills. We've published 2 books already, both about cutting-edge research on women's health, and we're about to publish our 3rd, which is going to be on new treatment methods for women in psychotherapy and feminist psychotherapy. We have brochures for new mothers that we have both online, both in Hebrew and now in Arabic. And here is the center, the center in numbers. Over 800 mothers were helped in Mom to Mom with over 260 volunteers. Over 700 women and men, we do see men as well, have received psychotherapy. 50 articles just this year were published in scientific journals, and we have 13 dedicated staff and over 60 graduate students. And when we started the center, did 2 health surveys, one among Jewish women and the other among Bedouin women, and we were struck by this finding, which was that there is a huge differential. A huge number of Bedouin women are reporting urinary tract infections and in anemia. So we asked, what is the common denominator between these 2 things? And we found that one of the things that what is common among the unrecognized villages of the Negev is the burning of backyard trash and waste. And when we burn waste, it's very hazardous because of non-combustible materials, explosive materials, and harmful chemicals that are burned when you use backyard burning. We also find that children were often burned by picking up pieces that have been in the fire, and often these backyard burning spots were in fact just about 5 meters from the back door. They could be very close to the home. The other thing is that we found that women were having urinary tract infections because they were using backyard outhouses, and this unsanitary use was creating urinary tract infections. So from this, we started an environmental health activist program for Bedouin women. We met in the community, in the homes, using low-tech methods of teaching. We developed a group of 15 to 20 women who are health activists and environmental activists. And we started with the idea of using biogas. Biogas is the methane gas that's produced when we take household waste, that's organic household waste, and manure from animals, and we put it into a digester and close it and use anaerobic processes. Well, methane gas is produced, and this methane gas can be used to cook with. This was a program that was a combined program from the Arava Institute and USAID. And we had this group of women activists who went to see the home biogas units being used in the area around the Negev. And now that this has been proven, this group who worked with us developed a home biogas portable unit, which is a green product that's being sent all over the world based on our field experiments in the Negev. They actually do produce a biogas toilet, which solves the problem that women were having, that they don't have a hygienic place to go. And as you can see, you can read up about these things. And I want to particularly thank my two collaborators, Ilana Me'alim and Yair Teller, who were the people that went to China, to Chengdu, to learn about biogas and to bring it back to the Negev and to the country and now to the world. I want to give a little bit of a touch of some of the other kind of research that we've done. We heard from women that were being treated for breast cancer that they were complaining about chemo brain, or what they considered the cognitive loss associated with the treatment by chemotherapy. And what we did a big piece of research and looked at this issue, and what we found was that chemo brain is in fact not chemo brain, but it's a function, the cognitive decline is a function of the disease itself. And how do we know this? Because cognitive dysfunction after breast cancer diagnosis is found also among women who have never had chemotherapy. And so we took this finding, and now we're developing a program based on this finding to help women who have had breast cancer, who want to go back to work and are dealing with cognitive issues. And we are now we've developed a program using cognitive behavioral therapy to address the compromised executive functioning of these women. Other research topics, and I'm just going to run through this because we're running out of time. I know treatment preferences for new mothers who are suffering with postpartum depression, Arab and Jewish women's birth experiences, using art to understand the stresses of women soldiers, and mother and daughter health behaviors over the life cycle, with a special focus on preventing eating disorders. And now I want to get to the last thing I want to talk about, which is our new program called Covana. And I'm sure you're wondering what that means. It stands for the Combined Voice and Narrative Analysis using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and naturalistic language programming. So we're basically looking at when people come to the doctor or they come to the clinic, we're looking at how they use their voice, how they talk, how their voice sounds, and what they say, the narrative of their story of how they're coping with COVID, how they're coping with other health issues. And we take these two things together and we're analyzing them together and using these special statistical techniques. And with our model, we're now able to show how people are handling trauma. And one of the advantages of this is that it's unobtrusive. We don't have to have people go through a whole series of questionnaires or tests, and we are able to unobtrusively detect mental and physical states. This is based on a lot of research, not just our own. And we now have, this is being applied to long COVID, which is the symptoms that are left over when people are finished with the acute COVID and they don't find that they're managing to get rid of their symptoms. They don't feel well. And this is something that's happening with between 10% and 70% of people who've had COVID. We're also looking at people who have chronic pain, people who are having mental distress. And we also have done a small study on the first responders burnout who are dealing with COVID. This is our team, Dr. Dan Vilenchik, who is the machine learning computer scientist, Dr. Alison Peretz, who is my postdoctoral student, who has a doctorate in linguistics and in psychology, Ms. Rachel Abramovich, who's in charge of our field work and of the collecting of data, and our genius, Mr. Ruslan Aselienko, who's doing our data management, which is quite complicated in these studies. So I'm now finishing up. So I want to say, let's celebrate the advances that we've made in women's health that benefit women, families, and society. Vive la différence. New challenges lie ahead. We have to deal with COVID and the long-term effects of COVID, both at the society level and at the personal level. We have climate change, which is affecting all countries in different places around the world. And now we're starting in BGU a new school of climate change and sustainability. And I would say that our new social epid model of women's health is able to help us address these wicked problems that are going to challenge us in the future. So let us celebrate the women we know and the women that we work with. And one last thank you to all of you at CABGU, all of the staff, Natalie, Galit, Susanna, and the staff behind the scenes, Zach and Mark. I want to thank you. I want to thank my staff, who are the people that give the wind in my sails. And thank you for joining this webinar. And good health to us all.
Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
It's so impressive. You're doing so much on such a broad spectrum. And I see we do have some questions coming in. I couldn't imagine this would be a silent group. Miriam Roland has asked from Montreal, have you studied eating disorders?
Yes, indeed. In fact, we have a big study that we did on mothers and daughters, and we looked specifically at how mothers, what strategies mothers can use to prevent eating disorders in their children, in their daughters particularly. So I had a doctoral student who used this paradigm of looking at mothers and daughters, and she was able to identify the strategies that mothers could use in order to help their daughters not develop eating disorders, or if they already had eating disorders, to help them make a recovery from eating disorders. So yes, I have a series of articles on eating disorders, but again, it's not possible to present everything that we've done, but it's a very important area. And we know how devastating it can be for families, for mothers, for daughters, when the family's dealing with eating disorders. So yes, it's an issue that we've looked at.
Thank you, Julie. An anonymous question. Canada has a Minister for Women and Gender Equality. Is there an equivalent in Israel?
Yes, there is a prime minister's committee on gender, but one would say that they need to do a lot more work. One of the problems in Israel is that programs that have been developed, for example, in the issues of domestic violence, were developed, were presented, were brought into, brought to the Knesset. Money was allocated, but the government didn't transfer the money, and so the programs were not brought into action. So these are some of the issues that the women's caucus in the Knesset have been trying to deal with.
Thank you. I'm going to combine two questions here because they both deal with Covana. One is by Richard Levy, and one is from a good friend and colleague of mine, Janet Irwin. And I think for me as well, the Covana is very interesting because I taught voice and speech, and when I worked in London on a special course with speech coaches going into prison, they could tell who the murderers were by heightened text. So when you look at Covana, really? Yes, when you look at this Covana project, I'm going to combine the two questions. How does Covana help to determine treatment functions, or is that in the future? Which leads on to Janet's question. I think we can combine them. Will the Covana model be helpful with eco-anxiety? And are you are you noticing eco-anxiety among the young?
Well, there's generalized anxiety among the young. Let's go back to the beginning of the question so we don't forget them all. So Covana is in fact able to detect different aspects of disease. There have been a series of studies, not that I did them, but other people have done them, that use the voice to detect signs of cardiac dysfunction. Of course, as a voice teacher, you know that it's very easy to detect respiratory issues. So this is a big issue when we're looking at COVID, because as you know, it causes shortness of breath. So the first question is, will we be able to use Covana to give us directions for treatment, if I understood it correctly? And the answer is absolutely yes, because one of the problems in medicine is that we have mind-body issues. So there are medical problems that are entirely physical and organic, and then there are medical problems that are organic but have an overlay of psychological distress and anxiety. So one of the things that Covana is able to do is it's able to separate out between the purely physical and the purely physical together with psychological repercussions. And we are able to detect, for example, levels of depression and levels of anxiety that are associated with different disease states. So yes, we are planning to use Covana to give directions for treatment. We are in the process right now of writing grants. This is one of the things we do in academia, of writing grants in order to get funds in order to carry out these studies. And so that's our current stumbling block. But we have done proof of concept. We do know that we're able to use our model to make these detections. And we have a model that was developed by a neurologist by the name of Yaakov Ezra, Dr. Yaakov Ezra, who was working with us, that differentiates between the various different types of interactions between mind and body and how they play out in the clinic. So the answer is, we very much hope that we'll be able to use what we've learned, and that's the goal of the research project.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to do a little combination again because you're so good at this, and this means we can cover more questions from more people. Dee Burnson has asked, how would you describe the change in women's health among Bedouin women in the Negev as a result of the work of your center? And were there specific initiatives that the center focused on for this era? Which leads to partly the other question. You mentioned the birth experience differences between Arab and Israeli women.
Well, those are two different sort of studies. The study that was done on birth experiences was actually done in the north of the country with a nurse researcher who was doing her postdoc with us. So what we found is that the level of care was very, very similar, but Arab women and Jewish women had different feelings about how they managed with the stresses of childbirth. So for example, for Arab-speaking women, the fact that they are not necessarily speaking Hebrew at the level that they want to can lead to the fact that not in that piece of research, but in another piece of research, we found that it's sometimes difficult for clinicians to be able to assess the level of pain that women who are not Hebrew speaking are feeling, so that there's a mismatch. There's not a perfect fit in terms of trying to understand symptoms in the birth process. So the other question was, what have we done to improve Bedouin health? And I would like to say that we've made huge strides, but I don't think that they're all the result of our work. I would say that the Ben-Gurion University and the other academic centers in the South have in fact improved the level of education of women in general. And when you improve the level of education, you improve women's health. It's an overall universal finding, so that women who have education are more empowered and more able to take better care of their health. So for example, they'll know more about folic acid and taking iron supplements in order to deal with anemia. But there's lots of room for improvement. As I mentioned, Dr. Samira Al-Fayuni Zaidna has joined our staff, and she is directing her efforts specifically at the women from the Bedouin community and trying to improve their health when it comes to pregnancy and childbirth and dealing with postpartum depression. So the challenges are still with us. I can't say we've solved everything.
Mark, I'm going to give you one of your questions. I just have to, I have to cut it to one, sorry. Mark mentions that when he first arrived in Israel in 1968, Israel was an extremely chauvinistic country, attitudes, traditional roles. He says he's noticed a huge change in the past decades. How do you find it, Julie?
Well, I would like to say that that we don't have any more problems with chauvinistic attitudes, but I would be leading you on. I think there are changes, but I think the challenges are profound. I'll give you one example. We would like to think that Israel is a very egalitarian country, but we know in fact that it really isn't. One of the examples I gave you is that women are the inequality of women in terms of COVID and their ability to earn money. So while it's nice to think that, you know, since we had Golda Meir as a prime minister, that we're a really egalitarian country, I don't believe that. And I think the current distress among women over violence that's been directed to women, and has increased during COVID, by the way, and the unfortunate series of women who've been killed by their partners, is one of those indicators that we haven't yet really addressed, which is why I'm sitting on this national committee that's meeting tomorrow, by the way, in order to come up with new ideas. I just don't think we're doing enough. And Mark, my answer to you would be that the only way we're really going to make progress on these really problematic areas in women's health is that when men like you who care about women join us and raise their voices and say, this has got to stop. We've got to change this. When men and women work together, and that's an example I will give you from our Covana group, the amazing work that we're doing together, we're much more effective than if we were just women or just men. So I think what we have got to learn to do is to form coalitions with men who care about these issues and get them involved and get them to speak out about how we need to change. I think that's going to be the only way to make a real change in these things, in these issues that are so critical.
Now, there are lots of questions, but I would like to pose a question to you, which will probably open a can of worms. What are your top 3 items on your wish list, Julie, professionally?
No, that's a complicated thing because I have my personal wish list for the programs that I want to have funded, and then there's the national wish list. So, which is the one that you wanted me to talk about?
Well, you choose any from which that you feel we should know about in case in the future there's some way we can help you.
Well, one of the things that I was struck with, I just read in the newspaper yesterday, is a woman who herself has been sexually abused, started a women's therapeutic community to allow women who need to recover from long-term sexual abuse to be in a place that's safe and where they can get treatment by people who know how to do this treatment. And I, for many years, have been trying to start a similar kind of model for allowing mothers who are in need of hospitalization after childbirth, who are undergoing postpartum psychosis, to be in a place of refuge and care that is not a psychiatric hospital and will not be a hospital where they're separated from their infants, so that we can prevent the next generation of people with postpartum depression or depression as adolescents. So I think that there are treatment models that we know work that we have not yet adopted in Israel that need to be adopted. So we do know what works. We don't always apply what we know works. So I have a very long wish list. Anybody who wants to join in these challenges is more than welcome. And there are many things that I think need to get on that list.
Thank you very, very much. Galit, am I okay for time? Can we ask more questions?
Certainly, yes. We still have probably another 7 or 8 minutes.
Wonderful. We're doing very well here. An anonymous attendee, how are women's issues managed in the Bedouin community, and what does the leadership look like?
Well, I must say that I'm very encouraged to see that women with education, like Samira on our staff, are taking up positions around the Negev in the healthcare system. So we see nurses who are trained, we see psychiatrists, we see women physicians, and this is something that we didn't see 10 and 15 years ago. So there is change. There is need for more investment in women's leadership among Bedouin women, but there are seeds of change. There are signs of change. Again, I think the way to make change is through education. I feel very strongly that that is the best way to achieve social change. And the fact is that there are more women getting higher education from the Bedouin community than men. So there are women who are taking leadership positions. One of them is in Canada right now, one of my former students. So.
Want to tell us about that?
Yes, Amal Alsana Hajuz is in Montreal getting her doctorate, and I hope she's coming back this year. I always said that she was going to be the first Bedouin Knesset member, so I have hopes for her.
That's
She's quite a leader.
Oh, well, I hope she's enjoying the winter. Another anonymous attendee, what is the state of women's rights in the IDF?
In the IDF?
Yes.
Much better than it was before. It used to be that harassment of women and sexual harassment of women was just an everyday thing in IDF. They have taken the issue of sexual harassment and have tried to make a change. I have, among my students, very high up in the mental health professionals in the IDF. And I know that women are becoming, are taking on positions of leadership in the IDF. And in my own particular area, my own student is the head of the mental health services for the Southern Command. My other student is the head of the mental health services for all of the IDF. And I know that many of my students are part of this change process. So women, there are many more jobs and roles open for women, much more than there used to be. I myself can't tell you from personal experience because as an Ola Chadasha, as a new immigrant, I did not serve in the army. But I do know that many more options are available for women, and women are now in combat roles. So things have changed in the IDF. I don't think it's easy for women, just like it's not easy for men to be in combat roles. And so these are issues that we deal with when we see women coming out of the army.
Thank you. Another question. What research is being done on gender identity, gay, lesbian, trans, etc.?
Well, our counseling center is a LGBTQ counseling center that's known for having trained psychotherapists to deal with mental health issues among this community. There's a lot more openness to talk about these issues. I teach these issues to my undergraduate and graduate students. We regularly train our psychotherapists for how to approach these issues. And one of our dream projects is that we wanted to start a counseling center for alternative families who are coming from these communities, because many of them are starting families in their own way, and they have some of the same issues that other parents have in their parenting and in their own personal relations, and we would like to see a better answer for that for families particularly. So there's a lot more openness than there used to be.
Okay, Julie, if we do 2 quick answers, I can do 2 quick questions. So more and more people are involved in this discussion, and your time is really appreciated. From another anonymous attendee, could Julie please, I suppose it means state or say, where postpartum depression is being specifically addressed?
We address it on many levels. As I said, we have the mom-to-mom program. We did a piece of research to show that approximately 40% of the women who are entering this program have symptoms of postpartum depression. And we have also shown that when they are able to join the mom-to-mom program, that it is in fact an effective way of addressing postpartum depression. Samira is also addressing postpartum depression in the Bedouin community. I also belong to the National Forum of Mental Health Professionals that have submitted a request to change the law to have postpartum depression be recognized by the National Insurance Institute to give benefits to mothers who are struggling after birth to manage their mental health. So we have both looked at it at the macro national level, then at the community level, and at the individual level. In Isha B'Shelah, our psychotherapy program, we see quite a few women with postpartum depression, sometimes the daughters or children of women who've had postpartum depression. And this is something that they've struggled with as adolescents and as young adults, how to overcome the leftovers, the residue of being parented by a mother who may have been depressed part of their childhood, which of course can affect their own mental health. So we see it on many different levels, and we address it and we treat it and we try to prevent it. So it's one of our main topics.
Julie, and Galit will stop me when she thinks these are too many questions. What do you think the overarching reason is for unequal professional opportunities and compensation between women and men? Is it an issue of confidence in women, or are women not receiving proper support and acceptance in the workforce?
I'd say all of the above. It's not an issue that's got a one variable answer. Women sometimes lack confidence in themselves. Often we see in psychology that if women are discussing their achievements, they find it hard to take credit for them. They say, no, it was all my staff, I didn't do it. This is common in women and men, where men are typically saying, I did all this and it's all mine. And so I think that we have different expectations of men and women. Often the educational opportunities are not the same. We also know that at the university level, young women who are trying to develop an academic career are often faced by being mothers to young children and find that they are overburdened. We saw that in COVID, for example, the research impact of mothers in academia was far worse than the research impact from fathers. So we know that whenever there's a crisis, a security problem, that again, women will be sent back to be with the children. And when they're trying to develop their careers, this can be very detrimental. So it's not one answer. Sorry, I wish I could give you the easy out there, but it's many things are, we do multivariate analyses in social epidemiology. It's not just one thing.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to hand you over to Susanna Delphin in a second. But before I do, can you see these beautiful tulips?
I've been looking at them the whole time. They're gorgeous.
Well, late last night in the minus whatever it was, my neighbor, Dr. Christine Daigle, came and knocked on the door. She said, I'm so glad you do this every year. Here's flowers for all the women. So I thought
fantastic.
That was really lovely. So I don't know if you've got tulips yet in Israel, but
we do.
Julie, I'll see you in Israel and I'll hand you over to Suzanne.
It'll be my pleasure.
Julie.
Yes.
It's quite amazing for me to witness all that you've done since the time we first met so many years ago, Natalie and Frida and I getting together with you, and to see what you've done, over 100 articles, all the programs, all the research. Your thoughtfulness is so impressive and wide-ranging. It's so interesting to hear how you've been so comprehensive in your view of women, and you're thinking about women needing men to help advance their careers, etc. You're thinking about Arab women and Muslim women, Bedouin women, and what you've done for everybody, and thinking in such a broad way, and now bringing AI into your assessment of what women are feeling. I find that just extraordinary. You also exemplify how Ben-Gurion has developed this comprehensive interdisciplinary approach to so many issues. And that's really impressed me about Danny Chamovitz and what he's doing at the university. But I think you were a pioneer in that from the sound of things.
Thank you.
It's really my pleasure to hear you. And I know that Ora Paltiel, Frida's daughter, is on this webinar, and I'm sure is felling to know that her mother was instrumental too in supporting you and was a role model for you.
She was for me.
So all in all, I can't tell you how excited I am to hear about what you've done and what you're continuing to do. On a personal level, my daughter is a psychiatrist for women with postpartum.
There you go.
Our interest in women's health, it spreads far and wide, and we pass it on to our children. And it's extraordinary and inspiring. And thank you so much for doing this for us.
Well, thank you for this warm welcome that all you Canadians have brought me, despite the weather in Canada. It may be cold outside, but it's warm in your hearts.
Yeah,
so thank you all for all you've done. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie, Natalie, and Susanna. It has been an eye-opening hour. We've learned so much, and it's just been, once again, a very fascinating hour, thanks to everything that you were able to share with us. A big thanks also to all of our attendees for taking the time to join us. We hope you are leaving here feeling inspired to choose, to challenge. I know I am. Our next webinar is an all-French event, which will take place on March 18th. This is our second webinar in French and is the result of excellent cooperation among our 3 associates organizations in 4 French-speaking areas: France, Switzerland, Belgium, and Quebec. Once again, I am so proud that we at CABGU are constantly thinking outside the box for innovative ideas. Please head to our website to learn more and to register for our upcoming events. You can find us at www.bengurion.ca, and when you're there, be sure to check out our schedule for the future webinars as well. Once again, a big thanks to our team, Zach, Shimmy, David, Simon, Elise, and of course our CEO, Mark, for your support. And we thank you for attending. Stay safe and be healthy.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.